Welcome, everybody. This is the big environmental forum that we're putting on, and we're happy to have all of you here. There's some frontline people here for the wildlife overpass. Hopefully there'll be a lot of information. I'm Larissa Byrne, and I'm serving as the chair of the Environmental Commission this year. And we've done some great things. I encourage you to be involved and stay involved. And hopefully this is a way for us all to work together to make this wildlife overpass a success for generations. And we feel strongly about having you guys involved because that's what's going to make it happen. So, and the students, to see all the students here is wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to my vice chair, Randy Feilish.
Good evening. I'm Randy Feilish. I'm the vice chair of the Calabasas Environmental Commission. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come tonight. I want to thank our expert panel here. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. And I want to thank the local agencies and groups. Everybody should stop by the tables after the presentation and see what they have to offer and what the information they have to share. Thank you guys all for coming. And I'd like to introduce Whitney Schwartz.
Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney Schwartz, Environmental Commissioner. I am thrilled to be here. I love what the forum offers. There's so much information to gain. Thank you to the panel, to the residents, to the students. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm David Cohen, again, welcome. I also want to recognize the student members of our commission who have been so helpful this year. They've helped with the plastic recycling. We've got samples of that on the side. There's new projects going on, Pencil to Planet. Definitely check out all the tables. And without further ado, we'll call up the staff for a staff report and update on what's going on here in our exciting city. Thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Curtis Castle. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Calabasas. It's really an honor to be here with so many people who are passionate about sustainability and the environment. And they're not just on this panel, they're everybody in this room. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We can feel the energy, and it really brings a lot to the forum. So with that, I'm just going to go through a few quick updates on what the city does. And this is really just touching on the things that we do. We have, like most things in the environmental world, we have lots of ambitions and lots of goals. And some of those we're able to realize faster than the others. And this is going to highlight some of those. So we are, as staff, we work closely with the Environmental Commission, and that is an appointed body, right? And they are really here for you, and they're here for the community. And we encourage everyone to show up to our commission meetings and listen to what's going on so you can keep your finger on the pulse of the environmental and sustainability topics that the city is pursuing. One great item project that we just completed, and this was a collaboration. This has environmental aspects. This has just typical civil engineering aspects, was the Green Street project. This is the upper end of Las Virgenes Road. Beyond just enhancing paving and curb and gutter, we put in bioswale, so we capture runoff before it gets into the creek, which is going to help the water quality and the Las Virgenes Creek, south of the 101. That was a really big success for the city. We pulled together a lot of different types of funding to pull that project off. So that's something that was done. Moving on to something that's in the works. We have a project to do some great work in the creek itself. We have a trail network down there that can at times be tough to find because of the growth, which is a good thing. That means we have water in the creek if things are growing. But we're going to enhance the trail. We're also going to try to make the creek more friendly to the flora and the fauna. And so that's going to involve a certain amount of soft bottoming and removing concrete and doing other things to enhance habitat, primarily for fish, but also removing invasive species and encouraging native plant species to grow. We have a community workshop. This is a plug next Thursday at the community center, beginning at 5. So please come over to that and you can have some input on that project. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Melanie.
Thank you, Curtis. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanice. I'm an environmental management analyst here with the City of Calabasas. I'm really grateful to be here this afternoon or evening to discuss some of our wonderful programs we have in place. Just picking up where Curtis left off, we have our Community Recycling Awareness Calendar. This is a competition that occurs annually, and the calendar is printed and available for the community. I know we have quite a few high school students here tonight. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have participated in the recycling calendar contest? You've raised them high. Proud. Wonderful. Thank you all for your contributions. So K through 8 students here in the city of Calabasas are able to submit drawings into this contest. This year we received over 1,500 submissions, and about 13 students get included in this calendar. We have some in the back on our Public Works table if you'd like to pick any up, and we also always have them available at City Hall. Next, we have our Green Business Certification Program. This is a program that was spearheaded in 2017 by city staff. It's meant to recognize businesses within Calabasas for water conservation efforts, solid waste reduction, energy conservation, and such. There are currently 4 recognized businesses, which are Fazio Cleaners, Murr Cleaners, Goldstein Associates, and Swan Nouveau. These individuals are recognized until the year 2017, and we're working on re-energizing this program, so we'll have some further updates for you soon. Next, for recycling programs, usually you'll find a lot of waste that you can't put into your conventional bins. So if you have any electronic waste, used oil, or water-based paint, we have quite a few programs that we can suggest to you. These are some flyers here. We have flyers on our back table as well. Lastly, we have a waste management recycling program. So if you're not able to attend one of these collection events outside of your home, Waste Management has a wonderful program called WM at Your Door Service, where you can actually request a box. You could fill your hazardous materials in there, and they'll actually come and service it from your home. If you're interested, it's called WM at Your Door. We have a QR code here, and if you need any further information, feel free to reach out to us. We'll always be ready to provide that to you. So we have a few upcoming events. We have our Arbor Day celebration, which will be on March 15th. This is at Wild Walnut Park. If you'd like to get your hands dirty, help us plant a few trees to help the environment and support our Tree City recognition, we're happy to host you. On that same day, we'll be hosting a free compost giveaway in conjunction with Waste Management. This will be at Creekside Park, just adjacent to Wild Walnut Park. And then lastly, we have our wonderful event, the Earth Day and Green Expo. This will be on April 12th, 2025, from 2 to 5 p.m. at Las Virgenes Creek. We also have these flyers in the back if you would like to learn more about the events. Thank you so much for your time, and we're very appreciative you're all here.
We're just spending those culture respects.
Absolutely.
And so before we move forward, I just want to introduce our biggest supporters, and they're in the back, our city council. So we have Mayor Peter Kraut, Council Member Ed Albrecht, and Council Member David Shapiro. And see, I'm looking around to make sure no one else is sitting down. I think that's who's here. Thank you very much.
We will also be passing it to our moderator, Prior Mayor Fred Gaines, to introduce our panel.
And you can't have an environmental event in this area without our former state senator, the great Fran Pavley. Fran is here. Well, let's get the show on the road. This is really wonderful. Our environmental protection, environmental enhancement is part of the DNA of the city of Calabasas. The red-tailed hawk flying over the Santa Monica Mountains is our symbol, and from day one, this has been part of what we do here. And the Environmental Commission is really one of the shining lights in our city. The City Council has always provided great leadership, and having these programs every year has been something that's become really a tradition and something to look forward to throughout the region on our various environmental topics. So happy to be here this year. There was some discussion because of the fire that maybe we should change the topic or do something different. And we said, no. Enough lousy news. Let's talk about the good news. And let's talk about the future and what we're doing and continuing down the path to enhancing and protecting the environment in our area. So I'm so happy that we're moving forward with this proposal tonight, with this seminar tonight. I deserve no credit or blame, although as a former city councilor, she get the blame anyway. But I was on the council when we first voted. I think it's close to 12, 13 years ago to support the concept of this wildlife bridge, and we actually spent a little bit of money to initiate some of the initial feasibility studies, and so to have it a dozen, 12, 13 years later, come to see it physically there and to be almost, it's the best feeling that you could have. And you're going to hear a lot of the details from our panel tonight. Let me introduce them quickly and turn it over to them. Beth Pratt is with us tonight from the National Wildlife Federation. Seth Riley from the National Park Service. Glad you're here, Seth. You haven't gotten an email from the new agency back east yet, so that's good. We're very happy about that. Paul Edelman is with us tonight. And, when God created the Santa Monica Mountains, he then quickly thereafter created Paul Edelman to help protect the Santa Monica Mountains. Paul's been here for a very long time. With Robert Rock from Rock Design Associates with us. Sweet. Michael Como from Caltrans. Sam Tanuccian, Calabasas High School class of 2004 from Caltrans. Nathan Hamburger has also been around for a very long time in our area, and we're happy to have you here, the city manager of the city of Agoura Hills. And Charmaine Yambao from the city of Agoura Hills. So I hope you enjoy the program. We're going to hear from all the panelists, and then we're going to come back and open it up for questions. You can write down a question and hand it to me, or I will have a microphone and I will go around and ask questions. I'm going to give you a little warning in advance. This is questions about this topic. If people are here to talk about the land, we've had a lot of environmental activism this week in Calabasas on another issue, and we have a place in the back where people can put comments and be involved in that. We're going to try not to morph this into that tonight. So, and other issues you may have, we're happy to do that. This is not a public hearing. This is this is a time to question on the wildlife bridge, and so we're going to do that. I'm sure we won't have any problems, but I wanted to put that out there before we start. And with that, Beth, I'm going to hand it to you, and if you'll lead us through the panel, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, hopefully I can work this. But thank you. I just really want to thank the city of Calabasas for having us. I want to thank Randy and the Environmental Committee. We have a long history here. I did a presentation here, 10 years ago. When you think of the years of experience in working on this project that is going to be represented on this panel tonight, it goes back. I've just been working on it for 13 years now. Some folks here for decades. But Calabasas has been here since the beginning. I do remember testifying at that city council meeting. I think it was 12 years ago. Calabasas wrote one of the first resolutions in support of the wildlife crossing at Liberty Canyon, which it was called at the time. I've done numerous presentations, as have my colleagues here. So thank you, all of you, for being so supportive of this project. I'll also say I had my first meeting with Senator Fran Pavley when I met her for the project. That was 13 years ago. In Lovey's Fran, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah, pretty sure. So Calabasas is a second home to me, like Agoura is. So thanks for always being so supportive of not just this wildlife crossing, but nature and wildlife in general. So, as Fred said, we're going to do some sort of brief round of short presentations on what each of our roles is. You see me a lot because it's my job to be the loudmouth, the public figure. But there is a whole incredible championship team behind this project that you see here and elsewhere. Could folks raise your hand? We got the National Wildlife Federation staff here tonight. Say hi to them. We have some of our dedicated volunteers. I've seen Sherry. I've seen George Coleman. I've seen others. I mean, and Yeah, oh yeah, George is even wearing the sweater. Anybody else here who works in the project, volunteer? I can't see everybody, so just raise your hand. Thank you. It really does take a village to put together the most urban and largest wildlife crossing in the world together, and Calabasas is a part of that, so thank you. And it really did start out. What I love about this project is it really was a grassroots movement that started out with all of you, with the people at this panel here, and we did it. We were told we were crazy, years ago that this will never happen. Yeah, well, never tell a Boston gal that she can't do something. But here we are. I thought I'd focus on sort of where we're at, but. This is at one of our rallies. Where's Nadia? Another team member? Where are you? Nadia took this photo. Anyway, this is at one of our rallies. And this is what I loved. Our first public rally in 2014, we had Sherry Ferber's class of school kids show up in 4th grade. And now they're out of college and still connected to some of them to this project. So this is a wonderful conservation, a science project that people here are seeing in real time, and I love that. We were just on the bridge today, so this is literally 2 hours ago, and some of the folks here will talk about what you're seeing up there. There's a lot of progress being made, and we get a lot of questions like, it doesn't look like anything's happening because nobody's there. Well, there's a lot of stuff that is happening off-site, such as getting the soil ready. This also is not like building a regular overpass. We had to waterproof this. There is testing that has to happen, since we're putting vegetation on here. So you can't use, sort of that time scale. I can tell you, as the person who had to raise most of the money and who is nobody's wasting time here. It is going at the pace it should be. And in some respects, for a public works project to go from zero to under construction in 10 years is when we kind of got real serious about it, right? 2014 is when we went public with the campaign. Is insane. A lot of you know that. That is a really rapid timeline. So I'll tell you, this is going fast. And as the person who cares about wildlife, if I thought there were delays, I'd be like, guys, come on, the mountain lions are running out of time. There is not. There were some delays with weather, the 2 springs with record rains. And that was because of the phase we were in. They were pouring construction at the time, concrete at the time. Can't do that in wet. And also the compaction of the soil. They had to redo a lot. So that did definitely impact us 2 springs in a row to have that. So instead of 2025, we think we're going to be, it'll be in 2026 when this is completed. But it is going. Here's some drone footage that Caltrans took. This is, Michael, this was January? Yeah, so it looks pretty much the same at this point. And what you're seeing is the waterproofing is that black, and then, there's some, Robert can tell you the technical term for it. Substrate is probably not the right term, but, this is the foundation for when the soil is going to go in this spring. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I'll tell you, the sound walls you're seeing, we have to design things, again, you wouldn't need for a normal bridge, and that other wildlife crossings don't even need to do, and Robert can talk about it. You get 300 to 400,000 cars a day on this road. Wildlife needs, noise means danger to them, and light means danger. Most of these other wildlife crossings, the most heavily trafficked I can find next to ours is 26,000 cars a day. And most of these are like not even close to that. So we're having to design sound walls and light mitigation as well. This is a photo I took from the hill last week. Sorry. If you haven't hiked up the top of the hill, it is a great vantage point. We will have an educational sort of display up there at some point after, closer to ribbon cutting. But that's a great view of it. So what's coming next? And here's a view of one of Robert Rock's visualizations. But what's coming next is you can see those utility lines there. Those have to be underground. The soil's going to go on this spring. I'll show you some photos of some plants. So we're going to have vegetation on the top of this part of the structure starting this spring or summer. It's quite exciting. That is a cool milestone. Then we work to, you see those utility lines. Those aren't just transmission lines. There's also water, technology, all that. Those are all going to be underground. And then we start on extending the structure over Agora Road. So lots more to come, but I'll tell you, I'll be really excited when that first soil goes on. Again, this is what it'll look like when it's done, fully vegetated. I did, before I turn it over to other panelists, want to touch on a couple things. One is fire, because we've been getting a lot of questions about fire in wildlife. And Seth, are you going to talk a little bit about the impacts?
In that. Then.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the bottom line is, of course, it's impactful to wildlife, especially in this urban wildlife interface. I sent out an e-news, happy to forward it. Seth has done a lot of research and others in this area, especially after the Woolsey fire. We knew it did stress the mountain lion population because it takes out their open space and they do not have options to move into it. So definitely stresses the wildlife. How much? This fire, we don't know yet, but it definitely has impacts. And then it has direct impacts, like we did lose P78 to the Woolsey fire, and then P64 was a remarkable animal the National Park Service was tracking. He didn't die in the initial fire at Woolsey, but he couldn't get out of the fire zone because of roads and human development, and ended up being found dead a few weeks later, pretty much starved to death because he could not get out. So this has impacts. I mean, I could go on and on. It has impacts for monarch butterflies, right? If they're overwintering and ready to go and their fuel stops are all burnt, there's no milkweed. So wildlife in California does have adaptations to fire, but, these sort of human-caused firestorms, especially in these, urban interfaces, they don't have as many options. So we just don't know all the impacts. The other question we get is, hey, does the wildlife crossing bring more, does that bring more fire risk to the area? Actually, the reverse is true. First of all, as we know, the Woolsey fire jumped the 101 freeway without the crossing. So as we know, embers doesn't need the crossing to spread. But we're actually going to help with fire safety. First, we're going to be undergrounding those utility lines. There will be an irrigation system on top that will help with it. And then as Paul Edelman can tell you with his restoration, let me yank in all that non-native mustard, which is more of a higher risk than the native vegetation. So the crossing will actually help with fire safety. This is our plant nursery, which is in Calabasas. So there you go. This is just some of the vegetation that's being grown. We gathered over 1 million hyperlocal seeds for it. And this is the stuff that's going to go on top. And I do like this slide just to point out that, again, we use the mountain lions because they are most at risk, but this crossing is being meticulously designed for all wildlife, from monarch butterflies to mountain lions, because as the National Park Service research will tell you, it's not just the mountain lions being impacted by this barrier that has cut off the Santa Monica Mountains to the rest of the world. And then lastly, I'll tell you a story of hope, which is we already had wildlife use the crossing. Dr. Travis Longcore, who is helping us with light levels, because again, to wildlife, darkness means safety. So we have to work at light levels on the crossing. He was out there with his students, and they watched a barn owl circle and fly over when some of the girders were put in the freeway. So for the first time in decades, it was a dark spot across the freeway, and to a barn owl, that was safety. So for those of us who've been working on that project, that was a pretty cool thing to see. So this, to me, is a project of hope. I love how Fred said, it is something that we have come together around and is absolutely going to have an incredible impact for 100 years or more on the wildlife and on the people of this community. So really proud, and thank you again, Calabasas. So that's kind of a big overview, but let me turn to where we're at, my colleagues here, to talk about some of their roles and what they're seeing in their specific work here. I'm going to go to Caltrans next. Michael and Sam, again, we just have a championship team, and Michael and Sam are no exception. Michael puts out and is awesome about communicating to the public if you haven't signed up for his emails. And Sam's question to us all the time is, how can we engage in your needs? I mean, that is someone you want on your team. So take it away, Sam and Michael.
Yeah. So my name is Sam Tutunjian. Yes, I went to Calabasas High School. I graduated in 2004. You guys have bright futures ahead of you. So I'm what they call a resident engineer for Caltrans. And that means that I'm the engineer in responsible charge of the construction phase. I'm the single point of contact between the project development team and the construction contractor, a local contractor, C.A. Rasmussen, who's done quite a bit of work around the community. But I'm only one engineer, and there are dozens and dozens people who support what we do. We have bridge specialists, Office of Structures Construction. We have environmental specialists, traffic management specialists. Engineers abound to make sure that the work is produced and delivered safely and in compliance with all of our environmental goals. Caltrans is always serious about environmental goals, but this project, as they say, has specific performance elements that we have to get just right, and they're very unique. It's a very fun project. It's a pleasure to serve. Michael?
Woo! What's that?
Hi, I'm Michael Como, and as Beth mentioned a moment ago, Caltrans issues a free weekly email, and if you're not aware of it and would like to receive it, please send your email address to us at D7, that's D as in David, 7, inquiries at dot.ca.gov, and we'll be happy to put you on the list. And the weekly email gives an idea about the construction activities underway, a brief description, and also says which lanes will be closed and which ramps will be closed, so that if you're commuting through that area, you will have an idea of what's ahead. This is going to take on more importance, I believe, when we move on to the Agora Road crossing. We're very aware of the local impacts, and so we try to communicate so that you can plan accordingly. And if you have any particular questions at all for Caltrans, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will take those questions or concerns and share them with the project team, and we will get back to you about that. My role as a public information officer is to answer those requests that we receive from the public for information, and so we're very happy to do that. This is a tremendous, tremendous project, and when I started with Caltrans, which was only 9 years ago after a newspaper career, one of the very first events that I did at Caltrans was the public hearing at King Gillette Ranch, and it was in the Scylla proposal, and it's been really a magical project to be associated with, and I want to thank all of you for your support and for your concern and your encouragement. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's give Caltrans a hand. I also want to point out Caltrans has embraced not just this project, but now has connectivity specialists in every region. I work with Director Taveras of the crossing. He spoke at P22's memorial service. They are all in on crossings and really seeing where they can do more across the state, but specifically Seth and others have been working with them on other areas throughout this region. And as part of Save LA Cougars, we're looking at how we can support the next, because although the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing is the most significant barrier in this state by any measure, but especially in this region, it's not the only one, right? I mean, there are many more roads that need help. So anyway, I just want to thank Caltrans. They've been incredible partners. We brought on Robert Rock, God, again, these years, this time scale, 2016, I can't remember now, 2018, okay, to work, because what we realized, all these partners you see up here, although amazing people, smart, talented, know their stuff, we realized when we were putting together the first environmental document that none of us had ever built a wildlife crossing before, and maybe we needed some help in that respect. So we put out an RFP, and Robert Rock and his he has a team from everything from a mycologist to engineers work side by side with Caltrans to make sure that biological component is stitched in. Nobody does bridges better than Caltrans, but they've never done sort of that biological component. And this, he'll talk about, it translates from everything from the stain color on the concrete so that it reflects light the right way or it doesn't reflect it, to, again, the vegetation on top and how that impacts the structure. So, Robert, please take it away.
Well, I mean, with all those tee-ups, I mean, you told me I had like 7 minutes. It's like it's like an hour and a half that you talk. No, I mean, I guess I should really just start by acknowledging the fact that this team that you see up here, I mean, I'm the most incredibly fortunate person in this entire room because you get to work with this team. I mean, you've got the forethought of setting aside this area decades in advance, from folks like Paul and Rory and Joe and Fran, and, being able to be a part of this conversation and help to propel this forward is truly an honor. So thank you all for allowing me to be a part of that framework. When we responded to the RFP initially, it was clear that it's not a singular solution. It requires a lot of innovation, a lot of thought, a lot of expertise. So as Beth mentioned, we've got everyone from engineering support as part of the team that complement the work happening at Caltrans, all the way down to our mycologist, our mushroom guy. And no, not that kind of mushroom. But Beth mentioned too the hyper-local seed. It's funny that I don't know if it's just because I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s and I just really always wanted those hyper-color t-shirts. I wasn't, fortunate enough to have a lot of them when I was a kid. But the hyper-local piece of it is that one of the key components when looking at a project like this, we are catering to the California mountain lion, right? The apex predator. That's the driving force behind this P22, all of Seth and Jeff's research that led us to this point. But if you extend that aperture of genetic sensibility all the way down to the plants, to the fungi in the soil, to the bacteria in the soil, to the microorganisms, you're cutting through that entire ecological slice. And that's really what we're doing and putting that back as part of this project. So those hyperlocal seeds have been an endeavor to collect seeds from very specific sensitive locations within about 5 miles of the project site, so that we're putting back that genetic material, supporting biodiversity, supporting the region, supporting the special characteristics of the Santa Monica Mountains. And so it's ideas like that, it's thoughts like that that have kind of made their way into the project and informed specific facets of it. And things like sound and light. With 300 to 400,000 vehicle trips per day, that's an incredible amount of sound. It's an incredible amount of human-influenced light in that corridor. All of those have this impact on the species that move through. I mean, I'm going to be silly here for a second, but everybody just close your eyes for a second, right? You can tell that I'm talking because you can hear, not just because you can see, right? So if you think about the fact that you've got those different sensory inputs, and then you extend that out to the next series of species, and you start to look at everything from how the mountain lions navigate through their environment to how bats move at nighttime, and you think about how our impact in those environments extrapolates across that spectrum, it starts to impact how those animals act in those environments. It's put stressors on those folks in those environments, right? And I always make the reference back to the fact my wife is an incredible introvert, and so we were at a cabin with some friends of ours a couple of weeks ago, and the kids are playing in the living room space. They're all singing karaoke, loud as all hell, right? I mean, the whole place is just rocking with whatever Taylor Swift song they were all singing, right? And then in the other room, a friend of mine is playing some sort of EDM music on his speaker, and she's like in between those two different sounds, right? That amount of impact on somebody where you've got those two different sounds that are competing, and the way that makes you feel an environment like that, take that and then distill that down to a species that's 1/100th of the scale of a person, right? So all that effort and energy that goes into how we look to mitigate the impacts from sound, impacts from light, is about how we cater to that entire suite of species, because if that whole chain is there, it's going to serve the California mountain lion, it's going to serve that greater purpose, and it is that ecological stitch.
It's amazing. And, this is different. We have benefited from wildlife crossings are nothing new. We've benefited, and indeed, we have Tony Clevenger works on our project as part of Robert's team. He's the one who helped design and does the study on the band crossing. Some of you have been in them. They're kind of the gold standard. So we've benefited from decades of wildlife crossing research to help us, but we're also setting new science. Again, nobody's had to design for light or sound before because these haven't been put in an urbanized environment. And the notion of having an entire ecosystem on a crossing is not something a lot of these crossings do. So we're also influencing new crossings across the country, and across the world, which is what I really love about this. This crossing was named one of the 50 most influential projects, up there with the James Webb Telescope and the Human Genome Project. It's insane. I mean, but to me, that's amazing because other crossings across the country are looking to emulate this, which is great, which is how can you re-stitch an ecological system, not just get animals from point A to point B. So thank you, Robert. Another incredible partner, and you kind of gave away my lead, which is Paul Edelman. Again, I feel honored to work with these people. I'm just the loudmouth that gets this done, but when you look back, and I've gone back and done a lot of the historical documents on this, because you get at, like, whose idea was this? Well, an idea is hard. There's a lot of people, but I'd say if it was anybody's idea, I'd probably give it to Paul, because Paul was writing about wildlife corridors and the need for connectivity at that Liberty Canyon in the late 80s. That's before wildlife crossings were even really something people knew a lot about. But Paul and Joe Edmonston and others just sort of intuitively knew, boy, we better have this continuous space protected. And if they hadn't had that foresight, we would not have a wildlife crossing today, because the number one thing you need for a wildlife crossing to be successful is protected space on both sides. You can't build a crossing and put the animals down in a Target parking lot, right? It doesn't work. So both on the foresight, but also the ecological stitch, you work really closely with Robert and Caltrans on ensuring that that's going to be, that is going to reflect the native landscape. So go ahead, take it away, Paul.
Thanks, Beth. In 1989, I was kind of lucky enough to be commissioned to do a study to look at habitat linkages across the 118 and the 101. And so I looked at everything. It was pretty crystal clear looking at the 101 that, oh boy, we better do something quick because we have this one gap here. And so I took it upon myself to produce the study, and then fortunately got hired by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy to do land acquisition work and fighting development work too, and became absolutely. I took it upon that role to make sure that we found a way to protect the land on both sides of the 101. If you look at the bridge, it's kind of a crazy location, and there was a crazy location also to purchase all the property on both sides of the freeway and Agora Road to make sure we could build it. So I've been at it for almost 35, 36 years. So I might mess up some dates at this point, but it was like chunk by chunk as far as getting each piece, and then you had to be sure that, oh no, what if the next piece gets built on or not, and what if there's no funding available and there's a threatening landowner and that sort of thing. So it was kind of a real odyssey to put it all together over the course of, I don't know, probably 20 years of land acquisition. We got the one last little piece in the north side in a 5-acre piece about 6 or 7 years ago by hook or by crook. And then about almost 20 years ago, we actually there was some money through when AmeriCorps first started, and we got some money through Proposition A, LA County, to put in trees between Agora Road and the freeway. And since then, we've been doing some restoration projects on both sides of the freeway. Actually, a lot paid for with Caltrans money for impacts of expanding the 405 freeway in the Sepulveda Pass. So it's been a real journey, and I'm just so delighted that it's come to this point too. And I look forward to working with these people and Beth on really making what occurs on the top of the bridge and on the ramps coming down on both sides as ecologically rich as possible. And my agency will be part of taking care of that vegetation after the contractor establishes that, I guess, about 2 years or something like that. And lastly, I'll say that she was right. In 1990, the then superintendent of the National Park Service, Woody Smeck, he was a landscape architect. And I said, hey, Woody, why don't you draw what if we put a tunnel under the 101 right there, because the Liberty Canyon interchange alone isn't good enough. And so he did draw some pictures in 1990 of a narrow sketched bridge coming down right where it is now. And I think I've given them to Beth.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where that brainchild really began.
and we really couldn't do a tunnel because a tunnel was, you could only bore a 13-foot diameter tunnel. It wasn't good enough for deer. But you have to do it at an angle, and it would have been like 375 feet long, and even if you put a skylight in it, it wouldn't work. So here we have the world's greatest bridge in a very difficult location. So what Caltrans accomplished by putting this in there, particularly in the center divider with sight lines, was phenomenal, and it almost didn't work. I can tell you that. So I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Yeah, design-wise, this crossing was not easy because we only had one spot, and it wasn't the easiest. So I understood about half of every design meeting what they were saying, but I knew enough to know it was not easy to design. But thank you, Paul. It's been a journey. City of Agora Hills. I cannot thank Nate. Sorry. Before I move on, Rory is not here tonight, but she is on our leadership team. Just so you know, the leadership team, there is obviously many stakeholders and many partners in this, and a special call out to both Governor Gavin Newsom, Secretary Wade Crowfoot, Director Tony Tavares. The state has been such a great supporter. Call out to our 6,000 donors, including Wallace Annenberg and the Pews Foundation, and I don't know if Coco's here, to Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, it's just amazing, the public-private partnership here. So there's many partners, but the day-to-day leadership for this crossing is 4 organizations, and then the representatives from those organizations who are literally living, breathing this every day, who has a fiduciary stake in that, and that is the National Park Service. Seth and Superintendent Jody Lyle is not here. That is the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, which Rory serves on. That is Caltrans, and then obviously the National Wildlife Federation, which I serve on. But of course, there's many more partners, and the City of Agora Hills is one of them who, again, since the beginning said, yes, we want to have a home for this significant conservation project. Nate, you weren't city manager at the time, but you've been there since the beginning. And then Charmaine, it's been a pleasure working with both of you, again, embracing this, which is not easy. I mean, it is not easy for a city to do something this monumental, but thank you for stepping up.
Thanks, Beth. On behalf of our city council, I know from day one they've been supportive. And I don't know if I've told you the story, but probably close to 15 years ago, I was with the city. We were in Washington, D.C., and you'd already pitched the idea of a wildlife crossing. And we said, well, let's go look for some funding. Let's see if we can find some. And I think we got laughed out of 2 rooms. And it didn't deter our city council one bit. It actually motivated them to continue working with you and all of our partners here. And here we are today, and it's amazing. And I know phase 2 will go over Agora Road, and we've got so many different aspects of that. And I feel so fortunate because in city government, we deal with so many different things. And this is one of the most interesting projects that I've just been around and been there. Robert Rock taught me, because my job is to look at, when it goes over Agora Road, how does that interface with the people driving over, the public, the bicyclists, people walking there? And Robert really taught me a lot of, okay, we got to look at these things and how we can not impact human lives as much, let them go about their days, but also not impact the wildlife going over. And those kind of interactions and cooperative kind of thinking is what really brought us here. But, we're just ecstatic to be part of this. And, we were able to also get some additional money to help try to get bicyclists on Agora Road and work with Caltrans. So fortunate for all of the partnerships that are here. Charmaine works on this day to day, so I'm going to give her an opportunity to speak on the things she's working on.
Charmaine Yambao, I'm actually a civil engineer for the City of Agora Hills. My background actually has an emphasis in environmental engineering, and to work on I've never really built a bridge. I did a lot of water systems, wastewater systems, but to have been asked to work on a wildlife crossing, a bridge for a big cat, how could I say no? I mean, my goodness. I've worked close to 13 years on this. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'm probably seen as that nudge from the beginning because my job is for the City of Agora Hills. It's to protect the safety and our transportation system, our residents. And when a project like this comes through, that's my priority. They hired me as the engineer for that. So, but with that comes a little private joy because it does give me a very interesting project to work on. So when I'm working on some roads, storm drains, and then Caltrans calls, I got to put my hat on and say, well, but I have a little bit of joy because it is actually it's probably one of the projects I get asked about the most when they find out I work for the city of Agoura Hills. And I think when I eventually retire, which is, many, many, many years from now, it will probably be the one that people ask me all the time. And my children love to talk about how my mom is working with Caltrans on a wildlife bridge for P22. And my most thrilling moment, I have to say, is being able to walk on the 101 freeway at like 1 a.m. in the morning with Caltrans. I don't know what kind of combination that paints, but anyway, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the next stage, which goes over Agoura Road, and I'll continue to work with Caltrans to deliver the project and safely for the city of Agoura Hills too. Woo! You've both been great, and thank you. And yeah, it was weird walking on the closed 101 freeway. It was like being in a zombie movie. Nate, I didn't know that, but, we were all told we were crazy, I think. So thank you. What I love is the people who, like us, we just ignored the people who said we were crazy. I'll also tell you a Caltrans story. Sheikh, who's not here either, who's the project manager. Let's give him a hand. He's amazing. He was our fourth project manager, I think, and I think he came on in 2016, and he didn't tell us this until recently either. And he said, yeah, the one who handed to me said, just humor him, it's never going to happen. and he, Sheikh learned, actually, no, it is going to happen. But yeah, there's a special place in my heart. Wallace Annenberg is one of those people who really saw the vision of this early when we were being told we were crazy. So it really does take a village, and thank you, City of Agoura, for being part of that. Last but certainly not least, we wanted to say for Seth, he's going to give a little more extensive update on the research in the mountain lion population around here, and I think other wildlife, but I don't know. But Seth, again, when you talk about how this project came to be, it was their research, which in at least the mountain lion research started in 2002, but some of their other research on other wildlife was even before that. But this is what I love about science. They didn't go into this knowing what they were going to find, but finding that this mountain lion population was at risk. Again, science tells us what's wrong, and then there's, the National Park Service science told us what we needed to do, which is connect the landscape for them. So I joke to Seth a lot that my job is making the scientists happy, and I think we made you happy here, but we'll see. Take it away, Seth. I always warn Seth not to show his complicated genetic slides, but I think he's got them, so sorry. Like, just show kitten photos.
All right, thanks. Thanks so much for having us. As everyone has been saying, I actually was here years ago to talk about coyotes, I think, and some other things. But anyway, it's great to be back, and we so appreciate the support of everyone in these communities, and especially the city of Calabasas. So I'm going to talk, as Beth said, and everyone has been doing, about the roles of the National Park Service in the crossing. Mostly I'm going to talk about our science and a little bit about planning and monitoring. So we started studying wildlife specifically with carnivores because carnivores need a huge amount of space, and so they're especially vulnerable to fragmentation and urbanization. And so we've actually been doing this for almost 30 years now, since 1996. And the goal was to understand how are carnivores living in this very urban and fragmented landscape, how are various aspects of their ecology and behavior affected by it. So we've studied all these different things, which I'm not going to talk about today, but I am going to talk about corridors and then barriers to movement, which is what the crossing is all about. So we actually started the carnivore study right in the Liberty Canyon area. And as Paul mentioned, and as he realized way back, even before we started this study, so here you can see the Santa Monica Mountains and 101, and of course all the development that we all know about. And this area, like I said, as Paul and others recognized very early on, was really the last best place to connect the Santa Monicas, really ultimately all the way to Los Padres, but especially across the biggest barrier, 101, between the Santa Monicas and the Simi Hills. So from the very beginning of the study, we saw that the freeway was a major barrier to movement. So these are home ranges for coyotes in the first 5 years of the study. These aren't all at the same time, but you can see there's on one side of the freeway or the other, and often the freeway is a home range boundary for these animals. And then we saw the same thing for bobcats. So here's a bunch of bobcats, again, right in the Liberty Canyon area, and they're up to the freeway on both sides, but almost never across. And then this is some more recent GPS data from a bobcat, and you can see right up to 101, and actually in this case not even crossing Las Virgenes. So sometimes, not sometimes, often smaller roads are barriers as well. So we know that the freeway we saw was a major barrier to movement. Was it enough of a barrier to actually affect gene flow and create genetic differences? And so we were working with UCLA and UC Davis and others to ask the question, so are there genetic differences across the freeway, even though this geographic distance is tiny? And how do those compare to genetic differences along the freeway where you don't have the big barrier like 101? And so for bobcats, this is FST, which is a measure of genetic differentiation. There was twice as much genetic differentiation across the freeway as along the freeway. And here comes one of these complicated genetic slides. Yeah. So this is, I'm going to show a couple of these for a couple of different species actually, but this is a program called Structure, where you put your genetic data in and you ask it how many genetic clusters there are. And in this case, there were 4. This one is actually animals from Marin County in my dissertation. So fortunately, those are in their own genetic cluster, which makes sense. But then most of basically virtually all the animals south of the freeway were in this red cluster. And then the animals north of the freeway were a mix between these blue and green clusters. And so again, you can see there was more differentiation across the freeway than along the freeway. And actually, this is the same figure for coyotes. And for coyotes, there was almost 10 times as much genetic difference across the freeway as along the freeway. And then the other thing we've seen, in the crossing, as everyone has been saying, it's not just for mountain lions, it's not just for carnivores, it's really for everything. And we've seen some significant genetic differentiation for smaller species as well. So this is work that we did with UCLA on smaller species. So these are all fence lizards I'm sure everyone has seen. And I'm sure everyone, if you've been outside in Calabasas, you've heard wren tits singing. So we looked at 3 common lizards, fence lizards, side bluff lizards, and skinks, and then at wren tits. And we saw, again, significant genetic differentiation related to fragmentation and development. So this is, again, that structure plot for skinks. There were 5 different genetic clusters. And you can see you have different genetic groups related to these fragments. So this is over by Fireworks Hill in the Botanic Gardens in Thousand Oaks. This is Old Meadows. And these are different genetic clusters. And we saw the same thing for all 4 species. And actually, if you put them together, the most intense genetic differentiation was across the oldest and the widest development here in the Thousand Oaks area and along Highway 23. And we saw the same pattern, like I said, for all 4 species, even though they're very different from each other. One of them's a bird. But we see that concordance among those 4 species shows this very strong pattern of fragmentation relative to how old and how isolated the patches are, and also relative to when there's a major freeway. So here's P22, our most famous mountain lion. And we started the mountain lion study a little bit later in 2002, and it's gone up through 2025. And actually, I changed the slide today because as of last night, we're now tracking P122. So we're up to 122 mountain lions that we're studying. And from the very beginning with the lions, we were really basically assumed that the Santa Monica Mountains by themselves would not be big enough for a viable population. So this is the first home range, the home range of the first animal that we followed, P1, a male here. And you can see he covers the entire Santa Monica Mountains by himself. And that actually is not an outrageously large home range size for a male lion. And then adult females, they have smaller ranges. This is P2's range, and you can imagine there's potentially room for another female to the west and another one to the east. And sometimes females overlap with their close relatives, like their daughters. So you might have room for maybe 6 to 8 females, and sometimes we have a couple of males. We're talking about a dozen animals that are fitting in the Santa Monica Mountains, and that's just not enough for a viable population genetically or demographically. So what about mountain lions and freeways? So this is early on, actually, our second animal, P2. And you can see these are points where she was coming up right close to the freeway, actually right in the Liberty Canyon area. And then she turned around and went the other way. And so here you have thousands of GPS locations from collared lions. And you can see lots of points right up to the freeway at the west end of the Santa Monicas, in the middle. And at the east end, out towards here, There's so much development they can't even frequently get close to the freeway. So a significant barrier for mountain lions as well. We've actually seen the same thing with 5 as a significant barrier, and 405 as well at the east end of the Santa Monicas. So when the freeways are major barriers for mountain lions, what does that do? There's a couple different problems. So one is very low dispersal into the Santa Monica Mountains, and we had one exception early on, which I'll mention, but that leads to very low genetic diversity because they're isolated and they can't get movement into the population from other more genetically diverse areas. But then low dispersal out of the Santa Monicas, there's a couple things that we've seen with the lions there. One is how we've seen that there's more social interactions in 2 ways. One is males, adult males interacting with younger males and even females, and this is leading often to fatal fights, which is something you see in other populations that aren't hunted, but we think it's exacerbated by the fact that they're isolated in the Santa Monicas. And then with females, we've seen multiple cases of them ending up breeding with close relatives like their father, and that close inbreeding also contributes to the low genetic diversity. So like I said, in terms of the mortality, we've had regular mortality from these conflicts between males, adult males and younger males, and even a couple of cases of females and then some kittens. And for the first 20 or so years, that was actually a major source of mortality. Vehicles are actually now the biggest source of mortality, but this intraspecific strife was something, that we think, I guess, as I said, is exacerbated by the isolation here. This is what you would expect in a natural situation. This is P16, a young male who was up in the Santa Susanas, and he was able to disperse out along the Santa Clara, cross over here between Santa Paula and Ventura, go up into Los Padres, and settle here, whereas young animals in the Santa Monicas basically bump up against freeways like 101 and 405 and are not able to get somewhere else. And then, as I said, we've seen a number of cases. This is early on. We had seen a number of cases where very close relatives were breeding. So these are our first kitten litter, P5, 6, 7, and 8. P1 and 2 were the parents, but then P1 mated with P6, his daughter, and they had P13. And then P13, this is a young male. P12 came across the freeway and had and mated with P13, and they had 17, 18, and 19, this is one of those kittens. But then P12 mated with P19, his daughter, and they had 23 and 24. And then he mated with 23, his granddaughter, and they had 36 and 37. So for 36 and 37, P12 is the father, the grandfather, and the great-grandfather. And that, they don't know that they're mating probably, we think, with their close relatives. They're just mating with whoever they can find, and that's who's around. So this is the structure picture for mountain lions, and you can see very strong genetic differentiation here. All the animals in the Santa Monicas are in this green cluster, and then north of 101 in this blue cluster. And actually, this red cluster is east of 5, and we've seen significant differentiation there, too. But it also has resulted in very low genetic diversity in the mountain lions in the Santa Monicas. So this is a few measures of genetic diversity, like heterozygosity here, and they're significantly higher north of the freeway than south. And in fact, most importantly, the Santa Monicas, together with the Santa Ana Mountains in Orange County, which are also very isolated, have the lowest genetic diversity in any population in California, and actually lower than any other population throughout their range in the West. The only place that had lower genetic diversity was endangered Florida panthers, which almost went extinct because of inbreeding issues. We did have one case. So the first 11 mountain lions basically were either north or south of the freeway. We didn't have any cross. We did have a young male that we collared in the Simi Hills in late 2008, and he crossed the freeway in early 2009, and he did it right in this one area that we know is important. This was his point at 1 a.m., and this is his point at 3 a.m., so right in the area where the crossing is going. And the good news was that he brought in new genetic material. So P12 is here, and he's strongly in this blue cluster, and he mated with P13, strongly in the green cluster in the Santa Monicas. And this is P12's offspring, and you can see they're a nice mix of the green and the blue clusters. But then you can see, so these two are P23 and 24. So for those two kittens, P12 is the father and the grandfather, and so they are more in this blue cluster, and so we were starting to see that inbreeding. So this is actually so don't take a picture and this is preliminary data. We're pretty excited because this is a pedigree with folks that we're working with folks at UC Davis to put this together, this pedigree for the whole study, going back to P1 So it's pretty cool. But I just wanted to mention that we've actually now documented 13 cases of these first-order inbreeding events of parent, offspring, and full sibling, and 9 cases of second-order inbreeding, like half siblings and grandparents and stuff. So it's a cool data, but it shows these concerns. And then we actually started to see these manifested. This was in early 2020. We captured a young male P81, and he was generally healthy, but he had a kink at the end of his tail, this distal tail kink, and only one of his 2 testes had descended into scrotum. And these are exactly the same kind of defects that were very widespread in Florida panthers before they were rescued by some females from Texas. They had like 90% of kink tails, and about 2/3 of the males had one or both testes that didn't descend. And so that was, not something we had hoped not to see until after the crossing had come along and made a big difference. And then we've actually documented 4 other animals in 3 different areas with those tail kinks, one at the western Santa Monica's, one east of 405 actually, and then one in the Santa Susanas. We're still tracking this animal actually, P106. And then we worked with very briefly, I'll just say we worked with a graduate student at UCLA to look at sperm quality, and that was another thing they saw in the Florida panthers. They saw this, what's called teratospermia, where the sperm have abnormal morphology. 95 to 97% of the Florida panthers had that, and so we looked with Audra at 3 animals in our area and 2 in the Santa Anas, and all of them had greater than 90% teratospermia, and the mean was 93%. So just another evidence of the potential genetic things that are going. There's a 2-headed sperm there, so that's the kind of thing that we saw there. But the good news is this is some modeling we did with a postdoc at UCLA, and he looked at heterozygosity over 50 years and asked the question, under different scenarios, what is heterozygosity going to do? And so this is with no immigration. You can see it continues to decline here with 1 every 12 years, which is what we saw with P12. It doesn't decline quite as much, but if you increase connectivity, not that much, like 1 every 4 years or 1 every 2 years, the heterozygosity stays high, and in particular stays above that level in the Florida panthers. And so the point being, you don't need like a huge parade of mountain lions coming across the crossing, and it will get used, but it's not going to be like used every night or anything. But we don't need a huge number to make a huge difference genetically. So just the last thing, just a few other roles that we've had in the crossing and connectivity. Worked with Caltrans and Paul and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and the Resource Conservation District early on to decide, where and what kind. Paul mentioned we were thinking about tunnel versus overpass, and we definitely decided the overpass was better. How big to make it. And then we actually brought in a bunch of folks from around the country and the world to give their thoughts in 2015. And now we've been working closely with Robert and Rock Design Associates and Caltrans on the design. And then as Beth mentioned, we're studying connectivity in other areas throughout the region. We have now done actually 12 different projects with Caltrans. And as Beth said, we're hoping this is just the beginning. There's so many other places in our region and other places that need help. We did some intensive pre-construction monitoring, which I won't go into too much, but just say a couple things. For a couple years through a grant actually with the National Wildlife Federation and CDF, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then we're working with partners with, again, Rock Design Associates and others to develop a monitoring plan to monitor the use of the crossing and to see what the effects on the ecosystem are and how does the lion population do after we build it. So these are just these other projects that we've been working on with Caltrans, but critical ones are Rocky Peak here to connect the Simi Hills and the Santa Susanas, and then along 126, it's critical to get all the way from the Santa Monicas up to Los Padres. And then I'll just mention we actually did genetic work on 6 different smaller species, 2 lizards, 2 small mammals, and 2 birds. And we saw significant effects. So this line is the north and south of the freeway. And so we saw significant genetic effects for 5 of the 6 species, for cypress lizards, fence lizards, and deer mice, and for California ground squirrels and for California quail. The only species we didn't see it for was California utilities, which makes sense because they're able to fly around more. So we are seeing, again, these effects, not just in the larger species, but in the smaller species as well. And then we tracked a couple extra species in this pre-construction monitoring. We tracked deer and coyotes along with bobcats and lions, and you can see just tons of points right around the crossing, which is right here. just the point being, there's lots of wildlife there. They will definitely find and use the crossing. And in fact, this from some cameras that Jeff had out in the area, right in the Liberty Canyon area, we had all 8 species that you would potentially detect with the cameras: bobcats, coyotes, raccoons, deer, as well as mountain lions, skunks, foxes, and opossums. So everything is right there, and it'll be coming across soon. And so I guess one question we always ask is, what do you think the first species across?
Yeah, well, we'll be having an online place to take bets on that. So think about who you want to pick.
All right, thank you so much.
Listen, let's give Seth another hand because it's been a tough week to be a federal employee. And I think this presentation shows the dedication and hard work they put in. So, woo! I just wanted to just point out a couple things. One that I think, to take away from Seth, aside from the incredible genetic graphs that he has. First of all, that the mountain lions are in a pretty dire situation here. I mean, you start showing birth defects, as we know from the Florida panther, the next step is sterility, right? I mean, imagine you're on Tinder and all the swipes you get are family members. Icky, right? That's what they're seeing here. Sorry. We also get asked a lot, why don't you just bring in some dates for them? Well, relocating mountain lions almost never works. Mountain lions don't always do well on blind dates. A blind date for us goes badly. You split the check, you're done. Mountain lions may eat their date. They do not mate for life or anything. They are love 'em or leave 'em species. They come together to meet for a couple days, and then they are solitary creatures. So we get asked that a lot. Plus, relocating mountain lions just not even for dates rarely works. They want to go back to their own territory. So it's better to naturally let them work it out themselves. And also, you'd have to be relocating mountain lions for the next 100 years, right? You plop them in, they're going to get hit by a car or may not be successful. So that's why you need whole-scale connectivity solutions to make it work long-term. And then the other thing I just want to stress, this crossing is unique. I cannot find another wildlife crossing that is being designed. Of course, we get roadkill. We've had, 4 mountain lions killed in the general area of just the crossing site alone. But it is not just about preventing mortality from cars, although that's a part of it, which most of these crossings are designed for. But you look at crossings in Wyoming or some of these other areas, if you didn't put the crossing, would the elk go extinct? Probably not. This is one of the first being designed to prevent the extinction of a species and for whole-scale ecosystem-wide benefits. So I think that is really important to point out, and that's due to your work, Seth, and the other research partners you have. So anyway, I think we are at the Q&A. Where's Freddie, our moderator, to come on up? You have some questions for us, and then we will take your questions until you kick us out.
Very good. How about the panel? Incredible, huh? And quite the love fest, as it should be. But Michael did ask me earlier, was there any controversy? Were you aware of any controversy? And honestly, no. There was probably more controversy about having me be moderator than there was about whether we should do the panel. But if to the extent there's been a criticism that I've heard, it has to do with the money. Where did the money come from? Shouldn't we be spending the money on the homeless, on schools, on parks, on other things? And so maybe you could give a little more detail about the funding of the project. Paul mentioned quickly about the maintenance or the continued funding of who's going to take care of this and make sure that it's maintained. And I think that would be important information for all of these people who are going to go out and advocate and on behalf of this project and future projects to have.
Yeah, I'm transparent. Please ask me anything about the money. As the person who had to help raise almost all of it so that this could go to fruition. And listen, I'm not your typical tree hugger. I have a biology field undergrad, but I also have an MBA. So, I am all for let's manage this with a good ROI. And I would have loved to raise less money. There isn't waste in this project. So I just want to assure people we didn't want to build the largest wildlife crossing in the world because we wanted to build the largest. We had to put it over one of the largest freeways in the world. So, the size really is dictated by what we had to accomplish, not just the freeway, but also the access road. As to the funding, so this project ended up being about a 50-50 split. Now, there's more to the project than the Caltrans costs. The Caltrans costs come in about $100 million, but there are other things we have to do. Robert isn't in the Caltrans budget, helping with the Park Service research, doing the education, doing the outreach, funding the plant nursery, things like that. But if you just look at what we're paying Caltrans, the total project's been about a 50% public, 50% private. The Caltrans price tag ends up being a little more heavily weighed on the public side. But we knew early on that the private sector had to step up, and boy, did they. Again, Wallace Annenberg, Leonardo DiCaprio, there's 6,000 donors. I could go down the list. But the public funding, we were also really purposeful about that. For the most part, it is not taking away from any of those things. These are dollars that were voted on from bond measures, so they have to be spent on conservation. They have to be spent on environmental projects. We did not take transportation dollars away from this. Indeed, none of this money came from Caltrans' budget. It came, the state side primarily came from money that had to be spent on conservation. And I will just say, lastly, to the argument that, even if that's all true, even if this money isn't this a waste of money? Aren't there other more important priorities? And I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. We're all working towards the greater good. And indeed, if we don't solve the wildlife issue, if we don't solve healthy ecosystems, that impacts us as well. COVID is a good example. What was one of the causes? Unhealthy ecosystems. We are part of nature, and we ignore that at our own peril. So creating these healthy ecosystems, which the Wildlife Crossing is helping with, I think most of us want wildlife here anyway. We support that. But even if you don't like wildlife, it's part of our health too. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, although, what's the total cost of the project?
Yeah, so the Caltrans price tag right now is about $92 million, although we're still waiting on an estimate for stage 2, but about $92 million. And then if you start adding, we've raised over $100 million over the life of the project. So that is going toward, you add up, that goes to other stuff, like I said, the education, the research, things like that. We just enabled the Park Service to hire 3 research techs, privately funded, so they could move forward. So we've raised, I think it's $109 million to date for, over 13 years, the life of the project.
And how?
Yeah, and that's thanks to all of you. And again, that's supporting things like the research, things like the plant nursery, things like P22 Day, right, which helps educate people on coexistence. So thank you.
That's a whole season and a half of Shohei Ohtani.
Exactly. I understand, but yeah, exactly. People spend $100 million on a yacht and nobody blinks. So $100 million for a 100-year project that is going to ensure the safety of wildlife, to me, that seems like a bargain.
And while we're on this topic, please explain what the plan is for the maintenance and the annual funding. Sometimes, unfortunately, we're not that great on maintaining beautiful projects that we built. And where is that funding coming from? Or are you ever going to come back to the cities and ask for money? What's the plan for that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, which we have covered as well. So where Caltrans did make a major donation, so applaud them, because we would have had to go out and raise about $10 million more, is Caltrans is accepting, at least for the 101 portion, in perpetuity, the maintenance costs. So give them a hand. The habitat on top will be so the structure is, the habitat on top is going to be owned by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. And as you know, we've raised funding to date, but we have $15 million more, sort of what we're calling the legacy part of the P22 campaign to finish it off. And that is including an endowment, or not really an endowment, but a fund so that the Conservancy has money also set aside for the maintenance of that habitat on top, or the stewardship is what I like to call it. Part of that 15 million is also to make sure that the National Park Service research continues for years, things like that. So we are not anticipating for those, for things like the 101 structure having to Caltrans has accepted me.
I just want to add that we're doing everything possible with Rock Design to design an irrigation system that is robust as possible, because irrigation systems notoriously fall apart, and hopefully we're going to achieve that. So let's hope so. And luckily we already had 2 reclaimed Las Virgenes meters at the site from our restoration project, so we're tapping into those, and it's one wild irrigation system that they're building. Yes.
And just to add one other thing to that, I mean, it's as a landscape architect, the considerations around maintenance. I mean, it's never a sexy thing to talk about early in a project, maintenance on a project, and how you have to fund that, how you have to budget for that. But in reality, the conversations that we had early on about how we planned for the landscape, how we planned for the nutrient cycling capacity of the soil, how we're trying to reassert this presence of nature on site. I mean, this is a manufactured space. This is a man-made space that needs tending so that it can be sustained. That comes with forethought of how we put those things in, to Paul's point about irrigation. Like it's usually the last thing. It's usually the thing that's left on the chopping block when someone does a design project. But we started with some of those considerations so that we could design from that point forward and from that habitat layer down.
Very good. I want to open it up for questions, and I promised our students that they could have the first question. So Ben and Ray, I think, want to say something. And I have a handheld mic, and I'm going to get to be the game show host and come out here talk. So here you go, guys.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Oroslan, and we are juniors at this high school, and we run our organization called the P2 Youth Wildlife Awareness, and we basically aim to educate the local youth on how they can conserve wildlife and Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. And to do so, we tell the story of P22, how he went from being a mountain lion living in Griffith Park to a national symbol for wildlife conservation. And so far, we've held our assemblies at many local schools, including Bay Laurel, Lupin Hill, Chaparral, and we've even went as far down as Manhattan Beach for Pennicamp Elementary. And we're also anticipating another assembly at Sumac Elementary.
And throughout these assemblies, we've presented to over 1,000 elementary school students.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And this is primarily from grades 3 through 5. And we've also brought along many guest speakers, such as rangers from the National Park Services and other biologists, organization owners, such as Lauren Gill from Save LA Cougars, who's a representative, and many more from the City Council to the LVOSD board. Just so many amazing figures. And here's our booth. If anyone here would like to become a guest speaker at our assemblies, please come fill out this Google form. We're open to anyone who plays a role in the environment and wildlife conservation. And finally, our question to the panel is, how can students play a significant role in wildlife conservation?
Woo! Well, I'll be short because I want to hear from the others, but I'll say students have been a part of this since day one, and your letters, your showing up at rallies, showing up at P22 Day has helped make this crossing a reality. So thank you.
Vote for every possible measure that provides funding for land acquisition, and stay on your city council representatives and county supervisors to make projects a little smaller than what the developers asked for. Okay, I can come around with the microphone, or like you can write down questions. And Seth, please.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think just being interested and excited about it and learning about it at this level and then in college and becoming biologists and wildlife biologists yourselves is so important to bring that, be that next generation of conservationists. So.
And in case you've been a little depressed about the future of our country, did you listen to these two kids? I mean, that was amazing. All right, questions. You have a question right here?
Could you outline the time from today where we are to when it's done? So, ask me, I was at tonight. When will we?
Well, I'll just say the exact end date is tough as you get. I'll let Sam and Robert and Michael, but 2026, if I had to guess, we're talking mid to late. But as I've learned with these friggin' spreadsheets, which are worse than Seth's genetic things, you know, it's harder to get an exact timeline until you're closer to that milestone. But we're looking at probably mid to late 2026 completion. But for the more detailed view of that, I will turn it over to the people who are smarter than me.
Yeah, well, what you have to consider too is that when the milestone that Beth is talking about delivering, is she's talking about the completion of the construction. But that kicks off a whole plant establishment period. And then truthfully, the way we consider, I mean, the way Caltrans trains us to consider project delivery is that it's never really over. The final phase is maintenance, okay? And then, so, you know, really the effort is going to continue. Yes.
Yeah, Robert, did you want to get, but you did ask about timeline on specific things, like soil's going to go in spring. Like there are a few milestones we know we're going to hit, at least a rough timeline.
So completion of the entire project is on schedule for a target completion date in approximately late 2026. What is going to happen is that is for completion of stage 2, which is over Aguirre Road, a significant and expensive relocation of utility lines that are parallel to the freeway, covering all of that with substantial earth moving, and then creating new habitat restoration areas on both sides of the crossing over the 101. While the crossing over 101 will be completed and the vegetation will be growing on the crossing over 101, there will be no animals on it at that time because they would eat that new vegetation, which is green and delicious. So when the project's second phase over Agora Road is nearing completion, that's when dirt will be added on both sides of that structure over the freeway so that animals will actually be able to cross it.
All right, we have another question over here.
I actually have 3. My first question is, we live right by this crossing. So my first question is how much of the power lines are you going to bury? My second question is, since we have genetically altered creatures, do you have any recommendations to the people who live in the area? Because is it going to be bringing some off animals because they've interbred? If you have any, because we've had neighbors who've had, animals come into their backyards, which is kind of scary. And then my third question is, do you have a list of plants that, since we live in the area, maybe we could plant some of those too?
Oh, that's a great idea we hadn't considered. That's I will, on the transmission lines, let me pass it to, I forget how many, and they're not just lines, they're, you guys, yeah.
Yeah, so there's going to be 4 what we call engineered transmission poles that are responsible for the lines that we're going to be putting underground. There's on those transmission poles, you see them, you drive by them, right? So on those transmission poles, there was 2 elevations of attachers. Okay, there was the kind of lower attachers that were mid-span on the pole. Those have already gone underground. No, it won't be the full run. No. Okay. In fact, it'll probably be, if my best guess, I would say it's about a third of that length that's going to go down. And so, yeah, the mid-span attachers, they've already all gone underground. So those are your telecommunications and your power distribution. What's remaining is the higher elevation transmission lines themselves. But that's not to mention that there will also be a water line relocation that's also going to occur. So there's a couple of utilities that are going on.
And then the last question that Seth and I will take it. I mean, there's no evidence of behavior change at these mountain lions. Indeed, these mountain lions are still behaving like mountain lions. And I will say mountain lions have always been here. I always want to stress this crossing is not bringing more mountain lions. Where mountain lions are, they should be. It is just ensuring that they do not, go extinct. But Seth, can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's no evidence that there's any behavioral changes at this point. And in fact, in terms of interacting with mountain lions, well, and so from a genetic point of view, the crossing will help, like increase the genetic diversity. So that'll be a good thing. But also, yeah, so as Beth said, mountain lions are already everywhere. They're already in the Santa Monicas. They're already in the Simi Hills. And we think actually it won't increase people's interaction with the lions, and it might actually decrease them because it's often young males that are trying to get somewhere else, like I talked about, that end up going into people's yards and things. And so far, they haven't had a way to get somewhere else, right? So they're bumping up against the freeway and development, and often ending up. Actually, this one yesterday actually was Camarillo Yard in Camarillo. And so now, if we can increase connectivity and provide them somewhere else to get to when they're trying to disperse, it could actually decrease the amount of times that they're sort of in people's yards. So, I mean, will just say in terms of lions and people too. Fortunately, I mean, yes, they're large animals and they have big teeth, but they really do not think basically almost ever of humans as their prey. So deer are they're their main prey, and if mountain lions thought regularly of people as prey, there would be no mountain lions left in Southern California. They all would have attacked and eaten somebody. Yeah, well, okay, so that is a different thing. And I mean, they aren't the main prey. Deer are the main prey, but coyotes are the second most common thing that we find that the lions eat, which are similar to dogs. So it definitely is important to, bring your dogs, especially if you live near open space. Yeah, bring them in at night and just be keeping track of them, especially, like I said, especially at night, or if you're off on trails, not having them, sort of roam around. Because, yes, mountain lions are a threat, depending on the size of your dog. Also, coyotes are significant if you have small dogs. So.
And we're happy. I have 6 dogs. I live in mountain lion country. I'd be devastated, but I've never had an issue, and I have, there are things we can do to ensure, to minimize the risk. The biggest thing is, bringing them in at night. That is when mountain lions are most active. But we do have many resources, happy to help. We have a whole coexistence program. We have lots of tips for dogs, livestock to help minimize. Listen, it is never zero risk with wildlife, right? But it's never zero risk with people. And indeed, you're in much safer hands with wildlife. I never take an attack lightly. We never want them to happen. And I don't like to reduce them attacks to statistics. These are people who have had experiences. But I do like to put the risk in perspective for people. In 100 years in California, there have been less than 50 attacks. That's 100 years with 40 million people. Contrast that to every year, 4,000 people die on our roadways. So you're much greater risk. Of course, I know I'm going to die on the 101, right? It's not going to be from a mountain lion. So all I ask is that people put risk in perspective, but we are here to help. I'm happy to give you tips on what I do with my dogs. Because I wouldn't want my dog killed either. But I've had mountain lions with 100 feet of my house on my trail cams, and 26 years there, I've never had an incident. So thank you for asking. It is a concern, and I want to assure you we're here to help with safety issues, whether it be for people or for pets, because thank you for wanting to coexist with wildlife. And we also take our responsibility to help you do that safely. So we are here to help if you have questions.
Excellent questions. We have time for...
On the plant list question, we didn't get to that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I also wanted to mention that the Stage 2 project involves quite a bit of exclusionary fencing to help, kind of channel the wildlife towards the crossing and not have those unwanted interactions.
Yeah, so I get to take the easy question. Which is,
plants.
That's a fantastic suggestion, and I'll actually have somebody work on that and actually pull something together so that it can be something that's sent out to the city of Calabasas, the city of Gore Hills, and have that add 2 things.
And if you are interested in this, we can't open it up totally, but at some point we will be doing public tours of the plant nursery. I think it is, me who has a black thumb, I think it is one of the most fascinating parts of the project, how we're perpetuating these native plants.
Very good. We're going to take a couple more questions, and then we want to give time for everyone to meet the panelists and also to check out all of the booths that we have of some outstanding...
And my email is prattb@nwf.org. If you don't get your
question answered tonight, email me. We will get it answered. My email is all over the internet, so come find me. We will get it answered.
All right.
One comment. We have one comment here in the back, and then I'll pass it back to you to share the next comment.
I noticed on the model, it doesn't seem that you have any tree or rock structures on either side of the freeway overpass that they would have a respite to before actually making the crossing.
It's really difficult to show things at that scale. But one of the primary constraints as part of the project has been the preservation of those large caliper oak trees that are along Agora Road on the south side of the freeway. So we were working up against those. Those don't really show in the model, but there's a complementary extension of those microclimactic areas. So there are areas there where we are putting in additional trees as part of that, and we're plugging in specific plant communities to build that back up in other areas. Because there's a lot of study that's gone into some of the slope and the aspect ratios and where certain vegetation should go back in. So there's trees that are going in on the north side of the freeway on some of the new slopes that are north facing, where they have a little bit more moisture because they're not blasted by the sun. There are additional trees that are going in on that south side that are building off of that existing oak woodland habitat. And then to your question about the stone component of it, again, stone is a tricky thing to show on a model at that scale, but it's another piece of habitat qualification that's layered into the project. And when I do some of the talks that I do that go on for 2 hours or so, I often put up these graphics where Seth and Jeff and some of the other wildlife biologists that are part of our team were talking about things like open and closed habitat and talking about the distribution of herpetological species and small mammals and the ability to like dart in and under cover. And some of those conversations got really interesting because we were talking about how to distribute piles of stone to create little stone habitat areas. And we started to scatter plot those based on 20 foot off center, 50 foot, 100 foot off center, and trying to calibrate how to do that. So we ended up kind of creating our own set of kind of habitat Rosetta Stones to understand exactly how to take that level of scientific insight into where those habitat typologies needed to be, to distribute them within that footprint, arrange them topographically, and then find a way to fit them into a really easy thing like the Caltrans standards.
We have a question here.
It's a two-part question for Seth. Is P122 the Camarillo cat?
Yes.
Good guess. And do we still have currently any deer that are collared?
Yes. Yeah, so I didn't really talk too much about it, but we have started to do projects to learn about what's going on with deer. And deer are really interesting and important. I mean, they're very important to the mountain lions because that's what they eat.
Didn't you have some of the collared mountain lions eat the collared deer?
Yes. Yes, turns out deer, well, all these things are hard to catch. Deer are especially hard to catch. So it's very frustrating when you catch a deer and collar it and the mountain lion eats it. But it is part of what we're trying to learn about. So, yeah. But yes, we are still following a number of deer. And I can get back to you about exactly where they are. But we're following one in Topanga. And then a couple of other, we were following a number out in the western end and then in Malibu Creek as well.
I'm wondering if the one that I sent to you is, anyway. I want to take a moment, though, of appreciation for everyone that's sitting up there, for everything that you're doing for the wildlife and the ecosystem and improving the lives of our wild ones, because everything that you've done over the last 13 years has improved my life as well, and I'm deeply appreciative. Thanks, Sarge.
All right, we have time for one more question. Have any students that want to ask a question? I see Calabasas soccer here. Were you on the soccer team? Marmonte League champions. Beat Agora twice this year, right?
Oh, Nate, you gonna let that stand?
All right. If you'll be quick, I'll let you both go. Okay.
Are there any plans for a permanent camera that's going to be installed on the bridge?
Oh, absolutely. We have a camera up there now. Will be 4 years of time lapse, and I'll let Seth talk about the extensive camera plan we have, right?
Yeah, so I just mentioned very briefly, but we're working on a monitoring plan to monitor use of the crossing and then just to continue to monitor the wildlife in general. So yeah, so it's huge, and so the cameras that we use normally can't sort of cover the whole thing, but yeah, we're going to use lots of cameras, and we're going to use some new technologies actually, like thermal imaging, where we can put a couple of those cameras and they'll just continually monitor the whole thing. So yeah, we're going to do a lot of monitoring. I mean, we need to, not impact what the animals are doing, of course, but yeah.
Not live for security reasons, but we will be sharing.
Okay, it's kind of a strange one because it's a future study. In other words, once this is all built with all the green stuff in it, and you have maintenance going on, you have a nice wide green corridor full of nice combustible materials matching two other areas that are also very combustible. So the question is, have studies been done on feasibility of fire?
Yeah, I can put up that slide again, but we worked with Cal Fire on this. It does not increase fire risk. Again, the Woolsey fire crossed the freeway right there without a crossing. It's all going to be native vegetation. What is there right now is a lot of for the non-native mustard. So indeed, this will help with fire risk in some respects. And if all else fails, there is an irrigation system on it that you can turn on. So we absolutely, Caltrans can speak to that. We worked with Cal Fire early on to design.
Well, and I'll go full geek mode on this one.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about that kind of that response that occurs when you have the intensity of the Woolsey fire. When we were out there in 2019, I had my soil scientist with me. I had my mycologist, my soil biologist, all the geeks that are part of our team, right? And I say that with all affinity for all of them because I'm one of them, right? The burn scar from the Woolsey fire in that area changed the physical characteristics of the soil down to a depth of about 14 inches. And as part of that, it baked out the soil ecology. It baked out the mycorrhizal fungi. It baked out the bacteria. It baked out the microorganisms. And what that did is it created the perfect recipe for the mustard to come in. And the reason that I say that, it's not just the fact that mustard is prolific and the fact that seed dispersal and it just continues to grow and grow and grow. It's a non-mycorrhizal associated species. It will drop a root, several inches down and put 6 feet of growth above ground, right? Whereas the native plants have a mutualistic relationship with the fungi in the soil. And when you have that soil biology in place, that nutrient cycling capacity of the soil, that exchange of carbon molecules between bacteria and fungi and microorganism back to the roots and the glomalin that's bounded to those root fibers, you end up creating a space that fights back against that onslaught from those invasive species that don't have that association with all those different things that are in the soil. And so when you create a platform with native species where when fire does come into those landscapes, because it will come in there again, it's part of what we have to live with, right? The low intensity fire burns those plants down, but there's energy stored in that root system and that relationship with the fungi, the bacteria, the microorganisms, so that those native species are resurgent and can outcompete those invasive species. So that's the goal in looking at this as this full ecological slice. We're doing that work all the way down to the microbial activity in the soil so that we are giving it the best possible chance to rebound when fire comes through. And then doing, like what Paul said, having that irrigation system in place so that when there is that threat, we can wet that area down to arrest that movement in that area. And the goal then is to be able to continue to build from this as this kind of catalyst in that location to continue to do the restoration work that Paul and his crew have been doing for decades now.
And Paul, I think you can comment. You look at the landscape, and I do. I mean, people don't know mustard. It's so beautifully yellow there in spring, and I just went like, oh God. But the native plants going in much more fire resilient, right? It is not, as fire will not spread like it would with the mustard. And Paul, I know you're looking forward to that landscape without all that mustard, right?
Well, the answer to your question is yes, obviously.
Yeah.
And that the mustard will burn a lot faster than the pallet that's going to go on the bridge.
Yeah. But no, it's a good. Listen, I've had to evacuate 3 times. I mean, we want to assure you, we really looked at this. This is not going to pose. Indeed, it's going to reduce the fire risk. But it's a good question. So thank you.
You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your moderator. And to close the program, let me bring back up the chair of our Environmental Commission, Larissa Byrne.
Thanks, you guys. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for coming and the hope that is restored with all these young people. This is our future, and working together, this is possible to make a big difference. So between Agora and Calabasas and all of you and all these kids, we could do this, all right? And Randy Freilish and David Cohen are the subcommittee that made this happen. And thank you so much. You did a great job, okay? Really great to have you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And everybody, please see the tables. Some of these are the high school kids that have really put some effort into it. And at the back, there's a lot of your tables, right? So thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks.